We had cataloged humanity for so long that their file no longer drew attention. A background species, the archivists called them. Noisy, inefficient, endlessly self-destructive. Their data streams were bloated with internal conflict, ideological fractures, wars that erased millions only to be repeated by the next generation. Statistically, they should have collapsed centuries ago. Instead, they persisted. That anomaly alone should have concerned us more than it did. I remember the moment their representative entered the Galactic Assembly Hall. Not because of grandeur, there was none. The chamber was designed to intimidate. Rising tiers of obsidian alloy, gravity-adjusted atmospheres tailored to dominant species, banners of conquered civilizations hanging like trophies. The human envoy walked alone, wearing no environmental armor, no ceremonial weapons, no biologic enhancements visible to our scans. A soft-bodied creature stepping into a room built to remind everyone who held power. The murmurs began immediately. That is them? They allowed this species to achieve interstellar travel? How many cycles before they extinguished themselves? I was tasked as an observer historian, impartial by design. Yet even then, I felt an unease I could not quantify. Humans moved differently, not with the fluid dominance of apex conquerors, nor the nervous haste of petitioners. They walked as if they had already accepted the outcome. When the floor was granted, silence fell, not from respect, but curiosity. Most species used their first address to boast of achievements or beg for protection. The human did neither. They spoke calmly, precisely. Their voice carried no pheromonal dominance, no sonic intimidation, merely words. "We acknowledge the Assembly's authority," the envoy said. That was all. No trade incentives, no military threats, no appeals to shared values. A request to be left alone. The chamber erupted in quiet confusion. I saw senior analysts exchange glances of amusement. A rising species asking for solitude was unprecedented, and to many, laughable. Isolation meant stagnation. Stagnation meant vulnerability. Questions followed, probing ones. Why refuse integration? Why deny oversight? Why hoard resources within contested space? The human answered each with restraint that bordered on indifference. They did not defend their history. They did not justify their violence. They acknowledged their flaws openly, almost clinically, as if those failings were already accounted for. That unsettled me more than any show of defiance. Our archives held exhaustive records of humanity's past. Planetary wars fought with primitive weapons, near-extinction events triggered by their own technologies, ecological collapses reversed only at the final moment. Any one of these would have broken lesser species. Yet humanity endured, not unchanged, but refined. When the assembly recessed to deliberate, the outcome was never in doubt. Humanity occupied resource-dense systems, their borders disrupted established trade lanes, and, most critically, they lacked allies of consequence. Intervention was framed as stewardship, resource compliance. A polite phrase for occupation. When the vote was cast, it passed overwhelmingly. I watched the human envoy receive the decision. They did not argue. They did not threaten. They inclined their head once, a gesture our translators struggled to categorize. Respectful, perhaps, or final. As they turned to leave, one of the elder delegates called after them, voice thick with condescension. The human paused. They turned not sharply, not angrily, but with deliberate calm. Their eyes moved across the chamber, meeting faces that had never known true defeat. I felt irrationally that they were memorizing us. The phrase was logged as ceremonial, non-hostile, low priority. I remember how easily I accepted that classification. Only later, much later, would I replay that moment and recognize the truth. Clarity is not peace. It is the moment before illusions fall away. As the human delegation departed the station, our fleets were already mobilizing, intervention schedules finalized, resource projections optimized. Confidence was absolute. We believed we were approaching fragile species on the brink of submission. What we did not understand, what none of us understood, was that humanity had not come to ask for mercy. They had come to confirm something. And now that confirmation was complete, the galaxy would soon learn what humans do when they are no longer misunderstood, but fully, unmistakably seen. Our fleets arrived at the edge of Sol with the confidence of inevitability. Calculations had been precise. Resistance was predicted to be minimal. Panic, chaos, desperation. These were the signatures we had trained to recognize.
What we encountered instead was something else entirely, silence that screamed of intention.
The first sensors detected structural anomalies along the orbital belts. Defensive platforms lay dormant, nearly invisible, camouflaged within asteroid clusters. We assumed error in our scans, but when the first vessels approached, the human systems activated. Not in flares of frantic energy, not in the flamboyance of ritual battle, but with quiet, precise efficiency. Each turret, each drone, each automated launcher moved in patterns that defied our predictive algorithms. Redundancy over elegance, brutality over beauty. Every strike we launched was anticipated, yet never perfectly matched. They did not counterattack with panic. They delayed, absorbed, redirected. They drew us in, making our own tactics feel naive, obvious, even amateur. Human vessels were smaller. Their firepower was inferior, yet each ship that fell, or appeared to fall, was never truly lost. Some self-repaired in situ, unseen. Others detonated in ways that disabled our formations, turning victory into calamity. Their soldiers moved through debris fields, not to survive, but to buy time. Time for evacuation, time for adaptation, time for what came next, something far worse than we expected. Our commanders laughed at first. The losses, the surprises, they were amusing anomalies, quaint mistakes of a primitive species. Then transmissions began flooding our open channels. Not demands, not threats, not surrender. Records, images, videos, holograms of ruined cities, scorched lands, shattered fleets. Entire planetary conflicts replayed with meticulous honesty. They showed us their failures, their recoveries, their near extinctions, and most importantly, their lessons learned. The psychological weight of it struck us only gradually. This was not their first invasion. They had endured before. They had studied their attackers. They had adapted. When our strike teams finally breached Earth's inner defenses, we assumed victory was within reach. But in that moment of triumph, a creeping dread spread across our command decks. The outer defenses were nothing but skin. Humanity's true defenses were deeper, sharper, older, and infinitely more patient. The predator we believed we were cornering had been sharpening its teeth for millennia, and we had only just walked into its jaws. We had expected human retaliation to follow familiar patterns, generals issuing orders, fleets maneuvering in desperation, soldiers charging towards certain death. We were unprepared for what actually arrived.
The first delegation docked at a neutral station mid-orbit, unarmed according to our scans. No energy signatures, no shields, no weapons detectable in the scanned spectrum. Just humans. Fabric armor that offered no protection against our energy weapons. Calm expressions, precise movements. Every gesture intentional, every step measured. They walked into the heart of our command halls as if the station were their own. And, in a sense, it now was. They spoke softly, clinical, data-driven. They presented casualty counts of our fleets and installations, not as tragedy, but as metrics, numbers to analyze, understand, and counteract. There was no rhetoric, no flourish, no begging. Their words were surgical, each sentence shaping perception as much as reality. We were shocked, then amused. They seemed fragile, easily dismissed. But while their voices carried calm, their fleets were already in motion. We did not see the synchronization at first, logistic nodes shifting, warships repositioning in response to minor transmissions, redundant defenses activated without alerting us. While we negotiated ceasefires and debated strategies, they were implementing counteroffensives that left our commanders scrambling for answers. Their diplomats signed treaties with a fluid grace that concealed lethal intent, clauses embedded in legal frameworks, subtle, precise, devastating, eroded our alliances and restricted our operational freedom. With a smile, they dismantled decades of coalition planning. With politeness, they bled us dry. I observed one human step close to me in a council chamber. Eye contact, a moment long enough to feel like a probe into my neural processes. It was a declaration, not of anger, but of inevitability. We realized too late that humans had never separated war from governance. Every treaty was a weapon, every negotiation a battlefield. Their apex predators did not need claws or fangs. Some carried pens, some carried words, contracts, calculations, carefully curated truths.
The full horror struck as I watched their fleets execute maneuvers in perfect coordination with their diplomacy. While we were distracted by civility, humanity was reshaping the theater of war itself. They were not merely fighting, they were orchestrating. And we were the instruments. In that instant, I understood that Earth had sent not negotiators, not diplomats, not generals, but apex predators in suits. And predators do not forgive weakness. We had expected their morale to shatter.
By every metric we had developed over millennia, they should have crumbled. Entire worlds were reduced to ash. Fleets that had once carried millions were gone, annihilated in precise orbital strikes. Colonies evaporated under plasma bombardments. And yet, humanity endured. It began subtly. Survivors of a destroyed orbital hub arrived in shuttles we had not detected, carrying salvaged components, raw materials, and unbroken will. Engineers appeared among civilians. Scientists were drafted as strategists. Even artists and communicators became instruments of war, broadcasting messages across planetary networks, unifying fractured populations with words and images. Their entire species moved as a single organism, compressing under pressure rather than fracturing. Every loss hardened them. When one colony fell, others rose in response. They honored their dead not with memorials or mourning, but with action. Reclaimed ruins became forward operating posts. Shattered factories became makeshift shipyards. Cities burned, then returned stronger, optimized, relentless. I observed a planet rendered uninhabitable by our orbital bombardments. Within days, the survivors scavenged debris, converted wreckage into weapons, and struck at our supply lines with brutal efficiency. Our predictive models, designed to anticipate every adaptive behavior, failed repeatedly. Each counterattack revealed lessons we had not accounted for. Pain did not deter them, it focused them. Fear did not immobilize them, it sharpened their instincts. I realized something I had never felt before. Fear, not for their extinction, but for our own inevitability. Humans did not need to win every engagement. They only needed to endure long enough to learn, to adapt, to survive the impossible. And survive they did, with a resilience so profound it reshaped our calculations, our assumptions, our understanding of what a species could be. In watching them, I understood that victory over humanity was not measured in battles, fleets, or casualties. It was measured in patience, and humanity had an eternity of it. And we had begun a war with a species that would not break. At first, the other civilizations observed from afar, their curiosity casual, detached. Neutral species sent observers, data collectors, diplomats, archivists. They whispered among themselves in frequencies we could only barely detect. Then the whispers became cautious murmurs.
And then, almost imperceptibly, they began to withdraw support from our coalition. Humanity had transformed the conflict into a lesson broadcast across the stars. Every loss was recorded, every error cataloged, every recovery, every improvised counterattack, every city rebuilt from the ashes. It was all documented with clarity and precision. Transparency that left no room for doubt. They were resilient, relentless, and frighteningly adaptive. We had expected fear and chaos to dominate the narrative. Instead, other civilizations saw something we had tried to hide. Humans could be hurt, crippled, driven to the brink, and yet they rose again and again, stronger, sharper, more coordinated. Refugees carried tales not of conquest, but of protection. Humans shielding weaker species while under attack themselves, teaching survival even in the face of annihilation. It was a message not of triumph, but of enduring purpose. Our coalition faltered. The moral authority we had assumed was ours evaporated. Where we believed ourselves enforcers of order, we were now perceived as aggressors. By the time our council attempted peace talks, the majority of our allies had already departed, observing quietly, learning, preparing, no longer willing to risk themselves on the front lines of what had become an existential showcase. Humans never claimed heroism. They never broadcast their own virtue. They acted, they endured, they adapted, and in doing so, they rewrote their role in the galaxy. What had begun as a conflict we thought simple had become a revelation,
a species that refused not only to be broken, but to be ignored. And the galaxy, once indifferent, had begun to take note. The question lingered in our minds and in our records. How far could a species go when every defeat became a lesson, every loss a tool, every action a statement? By the time we realized the answer, it might already be too late. We believed our final offensives would end it. The calculations were flawless, or so we thought. Dozens of campaigns had been meticulously planned, every orbital strike, every fleet movement, every boarding operation mapped against our intelligence of human behavior. We were confident that our superior weapons, our experience in extinguishing lesser species, and our cold, disciplined precision would crush humanity in weeks, perhaps days. We were wrong. From the first engagement, it became clear that humans had anticipated us. Every tactic we deployed had been studied.
Every pattern of our fleet, every psychological projection of our commanders, every assumption embedded in our simulations, they had observed it all. They were patient, calculating, and frighteningly adaptive. It was not brute force that defeated us in the opening clashes. It was foresight. They baited us into decisive engagements, then absorbed our assaults with resilience that broke our confidence. Ships that seemed destroyed reappeared elsewhere, their crews intact or replaced. Supply lines we assumed secure collapsed under precise, calculated strikes. Human endurance had been weaponized. Their fleets fought in shifts, crews rotating to prevent exhaustion. Every loss was anticipated, measured, and repurposed. Factories that had burned in our orbital bombardments were replaced within hours by hidden fabrication facilities, producing ships, weapons, and machinery that did not exist in our intelligence databases. Every settlement we destroyed was another test of human adaptability, a lesson we were failing to learn fast enough. There was no single throne, no central command, no mortal vulnerability. Humanity had decentralized survival itself, diffusing it across planets, systems, and entire orbital networks. When our morale began to fracture, when our supply lines faltered under pressure we had not predicted, humanity extended terms. Not demands, not threats, not ultimatums. Their words were measured, their tone calm, fair, merciful. They could have annihilated us utterly. Every fleet, every station, every commander within our coalition could have been obliterated, our species erased from their records. Instead, they offered restraint, not forgiveness, not weakness, control, a precise surgical limitation of our options, leaving us intact but diminished. It was the cruelest blow. Their mercy was sharper than any weapon. Our surrender was accepted, not with jubilation, but with deliberate equanimity. They did not celebrate victory. They allowed us to understand, in the quiet aftermath, the scale of what we had misjudged. For centuries, the galaxy had assumed humanity fragile. That assumption was now destroyed. The very definition of persistence had been rewritten. Their survival was no longer passive endurance. It was an active, evolving force. A species that could endure annihilation, learn from it, adapt, and respond with patience measured in lifetimes. A species that chose restraint, not out of weakness, but strategy.
In that moment, I realized something profound. The galaxy would never again mistake humans for prey, for pawns, for fragile creatures easily manipulated. They had survived the impossible, and in doing so, had remade the rules of engagement, not just with our forces, but with every observer who had dared doubt them. The cost of underestimating persistence was no longer theoretical. It had been paid in blood, in shattered fleets, in the humiliation of experienced commanders who could not understand how their superior technology had been outmatched by something intangible. The relentlessness, the foresight, the calculated patience of a species unwilling to break, unwilling to falter, unwilling to surrender their autonomy, even when their worlds burned around them. By the time our records were filed, by the time the survivors of our fleets limped back to report, one truth was undeniable. Humans did not fight like other species. They endured, not for glory, not for conquest, not even for survival alone, but for the right to exist on their own terms. And in doing so, they had rewritten every expectation, every doctrine, every strategy the galaxy had ever held about what it meant to resist, to persist, to prevail. We had faced the extraordinary, and it was not a weapon, it was not a fleet, it was humanity itself. And we had underestimated it. The war had ended, but humanity did not step forward as conquerors. There were no proclamations of empire, no banners claiming dominion over defeated territories. The galaxy expected them to assert supremacy after demonstrating such unparalleled resilience. Instead, they acted with a calm that bordered on incomprehensible. Humans established accords, defense pacts spanning star systems that had once been isolated or hostile, mutual aid networks that bridged planetary cultures, connecting populations through logistical support, knowledge sharing, and protective measures. Their efforts were precise and deliberate, each decision measured for long-term stability rather than immediate advantage. Cities rose from ruins faster than our analysts had deemed possible. Scarred landscapes, once charred and shattered by orbital bombardments, were rebuilt not with hubris, but with a quiet pride. Humanity did not erase its failures. Instead, it memorialized them, embedding lessons of survival into the very architecture of their civilization. Leaders spoke not of triumph, but of responsibility.
Of accountability for their own capacity for destruction. They had demonstrated that they could annihilate entire fleets, whole colonies, even planets. And yet, they had chosen limits: discipline over indulgence, restraint over revenge. Every decision broadcast a subtle warning. A species capable of obliteration could also choose mercy, and that choice was infinitely more dangerous than rage. Their restraint terrified the galaxy more than conquest ever could. For millennia, civilizations measured strength in power and dominance. Humans proved a new paradigm. The true power of a species lies in knowing when to stop, when to act, when to exercise control. Their restraint was not weakness, it was mastery. They became guardians, unprecedented in scale and intent, protectors who remembered what it meant to be prey and chose deliberately to protect others. I was invited to observe their worlds. I witnessed memorials standing beside schools, weapons factories operating alongside hospitals, laboratories coexisting with refugee centers. Every human settlement reflected balance, survival and compassion, offense and defense, memory and progress. They integrated the lessons of their past into the foundation of every decision, every structure, every policy. Humanity had learned long before we arrived, long before our fleets challenged them, long before their enemies underestimated them. They had honed the art of survival not through destruction alone, but through foresight, patience, and discipline. Our intervention was never a test of their strength. It was a confirmation of what they had already mastered. And we, the invaders, the observers, the chroniclers, were merely the test subjects in their quiet experiment. What struck me most was this: the galaxy had known power in many forms, but it had never witnessed a species capable of annihilation, choosing mercy, structure, and guardianship instead. That choice redefined fear. Not fear of death, not fear of domination, but fear of calculated restraint, the kind that could enforce peace more effectively than fleets or weapons ever could. Humans did not boast, they did not parade their victories. They acted, they protected, they endured, and in doing so, they created a new standard, a living testament to what it meant to be both predator and guardian, fierce yet disciplined, deadly yet merciful. In that quiet, terrifying mastery, I understood a truth that no simulation, no study, no calculation could have revealed. Humanity had transcended expectation. They had chosen not merely to survive, but to embody a principle that galaxy had never seen, a species capable of annihilation, yet electing restraint. And in that choice, they became something entirely unprecedented. Now, when new species rise in the galaxy, the educators, historians, strategists, and archivists teach a single lesson. Do not mistake humanity's diplomacy for surrender. Do not confuse their compassion with weakness. Do not presume that patience is indecision. Humanity is not compelled by circumstance. Humanity chooses.
Every act of mercy, every decision to spare, every calculated restraint is deliberate, and it carries consequences far beyond what our projections can measure. I record this not as a warning, but as testimony. For decades, our fleets and intellect confronted them, believing superiority in arms and strategy guaranteed victory. We assumed that repeated exposure to annihilation would shatter morale, that countless losses would fracture their unity, that a species so fragile in appearance would crumble under sustained pressure. We were wrong. Humans are forged in extinction events, not just environmental, not just external, but their own doing, self-inflicted horrors, wars that nearly erased their own kind, diseases and mistakes that should have ended them. Each near collapse left scars, yes, but it also honed them, tempered them, unified them. Humanity does not simply survive adversity, they learn from it, integrate it, and emerge stronger. It is not brute strength that makes them exceptional, nor is it intelligence alone. Humans are special because they refuse to give up. They refuse to surrender, not only for themselves, but for others. They endure not to dominate, not to conquer, but to persist in the service of principle, the continuation of life, of culture, of the fragile balance they understand better than any predator who seeks to destroy them. I have observed them as they rebuild shattered worlds, extend protection to vulnerable species, teach the lessons they themselves learned in blood and fire. I have seen them temper weapons with wisdom, strategy with empathy, strength with discipline. The galaxy is safer with humans watching, with them maintaining vigilance born of history and choice.
Yet the same vigilance makes them infinitely more dangerous if ever they choose to stop caring, if ever they allow apathy to replace conviction. They are not heroes in the traditional sense. They do not crave glory or dominion. Their victories are quiet, their power deliberate, their patience infinite. They are a species that has mastered war, not to glorify violence, but to master survival itself, and in doing so, to protect others. When our records are studied, when scholars examine the flows of history, one truth will emerge above all. A species capable of erasure can choose restraint. A species that could dominate can choose mercy. A species that survives the impossible can elect to protect. That is humanity's lesson, written not in treaties, not in proclamations, but in blood, in endurance, in the unbroken will of a civilization tempered by catastrophe and bound by choice. And I, observer and chronicler, can attest to this. The galaxy has never known anything like them, and it will not again. They are a species both terrifying and essential. They are humans, and their story is far from over.